And gambling. What's the difference? Good afternoon and welcome everyone to a very enticing discussion on gaming and gambling. My name is Diana and I will be facilitating today's discussion. Today we have with us Dr. Kim Lee and Ryan. I just want to hand over firstly to Dr. Kim Lee to introduce us to who he is and the work he does. Dr. Kim?
Hi everyone. Thanks for having me, Diana, and thanks Ryan for having me today, and for Relationships SA for inviting me to speak with you at the webinar. This is obviously a topic very passionate to me. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and pretty much internet addiction in itself inspired me to take up psychiatry training back in 2008 when I met a patient who was admitted with anorexia nervosa. And what I realized was they were addicted to the game World of Warcraft, and they were actually starving their virtual avatar. So starving their physical self and their virtual self. So that really, to me, made the connection between video games and someone's psychological health. And yeah, I've been following it ever since, and I do full-time telehealth and see kids who are referred for specifically gaming disorder.
That's fabulous. Welcome, Dr. Kim, and thank you for being here with us.
Thanks.
Ryan, if you could also introduce yourself to our attendees today.
Sure. Hi, and thanks for joining us on this webinar series as such. My name is Ryan. I'm the Senior Counsellor at Relationships Australia, South Australia. I've worked in the Gambling Help Service and the Family and Relationship Counselling Service at Relationships Australia. And I've been doing it for about 5 or 6 years. I guess when I think about what's moved me towards gaming, obviously with the start of, I guess some of my work I was focused around gambling, and over time, I've started noticing gaming popping up more and more, and the similarities crossing over more and more. And so it's become quite a concern.
Thank you and welcome, Ryan. Everyone joining us today, I just want to remind you that you may have noticed that there is a chat box available. So please do feel free to type any questions that come to your mind throughout the 4 segments that we'll be going through. And if we do have any time remaining at the end, we'll try to address as many of them as possible. Just before we explore these main 4 topics for today, I think it would be beneficial to briefly explain what gaming and gambling harm is. So Ryan, if I could start with you, can you please give us a brief definition of what gaming is and what gambling harm means?
Okay. So, well, what gambling is when you risk something of value on an outcome with an element of chance. And so that's usually talking about money, and on something like, a flip of a coin, a roll of dice, could be on a horse running around a circle. And in terms of the harms, I guess the harms, we often think, in terms of money, but I think it's also things like, missed work, there's stealing. So whether it's in terms of fraud, from taking stuff from work, or it's theft from work or from businesses or from home, withdrawal from regular activities, in terms of social activities. It's also about time, the breakdown and loss of relationships. There's some strong links between gambling and domestic violence. And then people obviously often feeling bad about themselves in terms of stigma and shame. And then that's leading to things like, mental health impacts like depression, anxiety, and suicide. I think the links between gambling and suicide increases it by 8 times the risk.
That's huge. And the gambling related harms are very varied and broad, and they differ, I guess, based on context and a lot of different circumstances for people.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that, Ryan. Dr. Kim, can you briefly describe to the audience what gaming disorder specifically is?
Gaming disorder essentially is a loss of control, and the World Health Organization defines it as playing despite negative consequences. So that could be loss of education, jobs, sleep, violence and aggression to your family. Secondly, there's a priority over other activities, and a loss of control that is, at least 12 months in duration. And, to me, I see a lot of different people suffer in different ways. They could be stealing money from credit cards. They could be soiling themselves. But for many people, gaming can be a lot of fun, but for a small particular subset of people, it's a lot of misery and provides them as a way to escape and can worsen their depression and anxiety, and they come and seek help.
Yeah. So gaming can be fun, but the people in the cohort you work with is where they sit at that gaming disorder kind of level.
Yes, and it's very rarely that they will come with the problem. When you make the connection for them, they might admit that they do have a problem, but initially there's always resistance, and it's led by the adults in the family, parents, caregivers, school, or it could just be some other side issue where the GP will refer for something else, such as school refusal or anxiety, social phobia. And then if you dig below the surface, there's a gaming disorder underneath.
I guess that leads us really nicely into our first topic, which is similarities. And I'm going to get straight into it and start with you, Dr. Kim. You specialize in working with young people. From your professional experience, why might gaming be addictive? And from a personal and professional standpoint, what concerns, if any, do you have about young people's gaming behavior?
I mean, gaming and, well, internet technology has skyrocketed, and we're at that tipping point where people like yourselves are acknowledging that there's a problem. And, you know, you've seen recently documentaries like Netflix, The Social Dilemma, coming up, and people are going, oh yeah, that is an issue. And, you know, 5 years ago, I had a TEDx talk about the spell of digital immersion and gaming disorder. And back then, really, people were not really waking up to it. I've got a documentary coming out next year with SBS On Demand it's called Are You Addicted to Technology? So we are sort of getting to that real tipping point where we acknowledge that it's taking away something in our lives, and usually that's time, because games need and require a lot of time and attention. But, you know, the gaming industry, the video games industry is so huge. They make a lot of money in terms of people buying the games or spending money in the games with transactions. Gaming is very social. You know, you can play with your friends in lockdown from the comfort of your own home. And gaming is exciting, it's competitive, and people find different motivations to play and different rewards. And the best games cater for all the player types, all the different rewards, so that you get a community. And games are much more fun playing against real players, other people, and interacting with other people than, say, a computer program or robots. Now, in terms of the sort of loot box mechanics, that's something that we can talk about later, but psychologically, gaming can offer anyone with the vulnerability or anyone who's struggling mentally some form of escape and reward.
Yeah, so Ryan, not too dissimilar to gambling, there's some components that Dr. Kim just highlighted. You know, we often see that gaming and gambling are perceived as two separate entities. From your perspective as a counsellor, Ryan, are there any similarities between gaming and gambling, and how blurred have those lines become?
Yeah, look, it's become really blurry, and I'm about to disappear to be with some pictures on the screen. I mean, you can gamble in games, you can gamble on games. There's gambling themed games. There's gaming themed gambling. You know, so if you look at this picture right now, there's some popular games kind of represented in pokies. There's Street Fighter, there's Call of Duty 4, there's Tomb Raider. And I guess if you look at some other forms of gambling, like there's Monopoly scratchies, Battleship scratchies. I mean, so they've kind of incorporated that quite a lot. When you think of pokies, like they talk about it as gaming. They talk about it as gaming machines, and they talk about gaming rooms in pubs and clubs. And then when you think about them, you know, it's the sounds, the music, it's the animations, you know, all sorts of stuff. Like gaming's learned a lot from gambling, and gambling's learned a lot from gaming as well. And then you have online social casinos, which is things like free online pokies and things like that. which then people often might use that and then maybe move, because the odds are increased, they might move to going online and spending money. But then there's also games that resemble pokies. So games like Slotomania, which I'll bring up in a second. Here we go. Which looks exactly like a pokey, except whilst you press the button and it kind of goes through and says, oh, you won or you didn't win, and you can pick how many lines and all that sort of stuff, you can't take any money out. So in a way, does it fit that criteria of gambling? Not necessarily, but how similar does it look? But then also, there's things like you can spend money to get money to play in the game. And so I can think of a client, I can think of a number of clients who've been caught up in online games, such as this, and one who spent over $10,000 in 10 months just on this game, because it so similarly looks like pokies and gambling. I guess also when I think about some other similarities, looking at like things like loot boxes, which Kim was talking about before. So if you look at that, I mean, you can spend $2 to get 2 loot boxes. And a loot box is a mechanic, which Kim's going to talk about a bit more probably, but is a mechanic where you spend money on something and you don't know what you're going to get, and it's about chance. And so that's very similar to gambling, because you're talking about spending money on something to get an outcome that's related to chance. Also, games tend to have things like limited rewards and enticement to try and get you to play more and more frequently. And then I guess another similarity when I think about it over time is gambling promotion and rehearsal. So there's a lot of games, there are games specifically focused on gambling, and they don't tend to be terribly high rated in terms of like, they're not R-rated games, they're PG sort of games. And they're things like Vegas Party, World Series, poker, you know, some casino games that you can play, and they're on like things like Xbox and PlayStation and things like that. And so really what you're doing is you're just practicing gambling, and practicing gambling is a way of feeling good about yourself and feeling happy and stress relief. But also there's gambling promotion. And when I think about that, you know, things like, or games like Red Dead Redemption, Fallout New Vegas, GTA 5, or Grand Theft Auto 5, sorry, they have gambling in the game itself. Yeah, they have gambling in the game itself. And you can, when you think of Grand Theft Auto, you can spend money to buy in-game money to gamble with in the game. But it's about being cool. And it's also about, sometimes you have to gamble to unlock progress. When in an earlier, because I've gamed for a while, when I think about PlayStation 1 or 2, there was a game called Gun. And in Gun, to get to certain areas, you had to play poker and you had to win poker. So it's really kind of forcing you down that kind of pathway, and saying it's cool, it's fun, and you should do this. But if you compare this to things like alcohol, you compare this to drugs, there's no drug-focused games. There's no you know,
alcohol-focused games either.
Yeah, there's no drinking party games. And then if you think of other games that kind of simulate it a bit as well, like a game like Jetpack Joyride, where your goal is to move down this corridor and try and get out of this place, and you get coins on the way. But when you die, if you look at the bottom left-hand side of that picture there, you pull a lever and it's just like a pokies. And that's how so you spend those coins to win rewards. And if you look at the rewards are on the right-hand side of the bottom, so you might win a boost for the next level, you might win an extra life, you might win all sorts of things. And so they're saying, hey, look, let's try this fun, exciting thing. And they're kind of programming you to get into that when you're able to gamble. I guess 2 other things. Overspending. If you look at pokies, if you look at things like that, they often might have 1-cent games, 10-cent games, but often you're spending $1. And $1 doesn't seem like much. And you go, oh, it's much, not that much, not that much. But those presses add up. Those presses add up to $10,000, $20,000. In the same way, a raid pass for Pokemon costs $1. And so in the same ways, those little microtransactions, those little things that keep wanting they keep pushing you towards spending, add up and add up, just like gambling. And David Zendel, who's a researcher from the UK, was talking about loot boxes, and his research said loot boxes were linked directly to problem gambling and problem gaming, and that effect was twice as strong in adolescents.
Okay. I guess that brings me to sort of a follow-up question for you, Dr. Kim. Do you believe that gaming can lead to commercial gambling at all?
I definitely think it blurs the lines. I don't think any particular study, other than the one that you referred me to, Ryan, recently, showed that there was a link. But it's definitely blurring the lines and promoting this fun factor with surprise mechanics and variable ratio reinforcement. So I think it's normalizing it. I mean, just think about, I don't know, sports bet, for example. Any kind of advertising or way to make the sports normalized is a problem. And also there's actual virtual item gambling within esports. So people play video games competitively and they are gambling virtual items, and then kids can actually get into trouble when they lose all of their virtual items that they earned through playing the game, and then they start buying them on third-party websites. So, I mean, is it a gateway drug? I guess in some situations you can say that, but I don't think anyone has made that connection.
It would be interesting to see how the research evolves around that. There's been some crossover, and there will be throughout the 4 topics we do highlight today. Ryan, just to go back to you, we know that gambling can have some serious consequences on the individual as well as significant others. What are some of the risks and harms that we have seen or heard about when it comes to gaming and gambling?
Sure. I mean, look, Kim's the expert around gaming. But I guess the first thing I answer is around gaming. I think missing sleep due to gaming, because staying up late, if kids have got TVs in their room and aren't being monitored, I mean, that's definitely a problem. Missing school due to gaming. I hear from some schools about kids who are not going to school, and often a lot of them are playing games problematically and playing a lot of time on games. Withdrawing from friends, disengaging from family. The research also talks about lower academic performance, school attendance, lower well-being, self-esteem, poor coping skills, increased loneliness, depression, anxiety. But also from parents, I'm hearing about smashed windows, holes in walls, police being called. I can also think about a parent that was talking about their kid was trying to pressure them into buying, well, I guess online credits, but also buy a new phone because it came with a new Fortnite skin, and she loved Fortnite. I guess also, you think about the sheer time lost, because if you're investing all your time in that, like when you turn the game off, what have you got? Generally speaking, not a lot. I mean, negative consequences due to online gaming are reported by 1/3 of people. And when you think about it, when you think about things like loot boxes, I read that it was estimated that loot boxes have made, I think, $18 billion in 2018. No, $30 billion in 2018. That's like a lot of money, and that's where it's kind of going. Mobile phones are dominating the market, because unlike a console, they're kind of in secret because you always have them with you, and you can have them on the toilet, you can have it anywhere. Whereas consoles, parents might be a little bit more aware of, and same with PCs. When I think of gambling, some stats say that 75% of children aged 10 to 14 have gambled in the past year. To put that in context, I mean, it might be that the parents said, "Hey, do you want to put something on the Melbourne Cup? I'll do it for you." Or do you want to pick some numbers for Keno and I'll go up and do it for you? But that's still a lot, 3/4. And similar to gaming, the harms around gambling are pretty similar. You hear about poor sleep, poor social relationships, withdrawing from activities, poor academic outcomes. It's linked to risk-taking behavior, and drug and alcohol use. I think it increases the risks around hard drug use around, I think I remember it being 20 times. And And young people are particularly at risk. Young people are 5 times more likely to experience gambling harm. And I think stats said that 1 in 25 young people have a problem with gambling. And I just don't think we pay attention to it. I don't think we notice it.
I think also, Ryan, we do experience a roadblock from parents and professionals when we talk about gambling and young people. Why might that be?
I think because we just aren't looking for it. We don't talk about it and we don't see it. Because 1 in 25 young people means there's 1 in every class in high school. But I don't seem to hear about them from teachers, professionals, parents. I guess because we're not looking. But also, like when I think about it, it makes sense that kids are much more likely to get to find trouble, because when we think about the brain structures, and I'm sure Kim will tell you much more about it than I do, but like you think about the prefrontal cortex, which is the part that's still growing and developing. It's kind of like the last to evolve and developing kids is very stress sensitive, and that's about problem solving. It's about impulse control. It's future focus. So if you think about saving money, if you think about all that sort of stuff, that's all about the prefrontal cortex. But that's the part that's still growing in kids. So that's not so developed. The limbic system, which takes over when you're really stressed, that part's already fairly well developed in children. And that's about emotions, it's about impulses, it's about habit. And that's about what's happening right now. And so if I feel uncomfortable right now, I want to stop right now. Whatever works right now is the bit I'm going to remember. The longer term consequences, I'm only going to remember really with that smart brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is affected by stress. And when you think about kids growing up, they've got all the social pressures, you've got peer pressure, you've got assignments, you've got potentially parents arguing, you've got siblings to deal with, you've got all this sort of stuff, you've got all this stress. So that part that's about long-term planning isn't on. But at the same time, games and gambling is going, hey, this is fun, and this takes away your stress right now. You don't think about your parents arguing. You don't think about the assignment anymore. You're just having fun. I think also, like, if you look at problem gamblers, they account for 15% of the harm whilst being 1% of gamblers. But for young people, that's 2 to 7% of gamblers. But the reason I mention that is 85% of the harm then is for people who are low to moderate risk gamblers. And I would probably think the same with gamers as well. And I think we need to pay attention to that. We need to pay attention before we hit the problem and the diagnosable problem area, because they're already experiencing harm and they're experiencing the majority of the harm. The social cost of gambling in Victoria was estimated at $7 billion. And the revenue raised was $6 billion. So it's not, like, from an economic perspective, it's not really worth it if you're looking at the social costs. And the social costs are that thing, because they talk about for every person experiencing gambling harm, another 6 to 10 others are impacted. So that's one thing to think about.
Yeah. Kim, if we could focus specifically about gaming. Gaming has been classified as a disorder in the 11th revision of the International Classification of Diseases.
Yes.
What has the research highlighted about the biopsychosocial, or what you refer to, and I hope you can unpack for us, the bio-cyber-psychosocial impacts of gaming on young people and potentially their families?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when I see a young person, my clinical formulation will cover the biological aspects. So that's family history, any medications and the effects. And often, if you look deep enough, there might be someone else in the family who's had problem gambling in the past, or impulsive disorders, impulse control disorders. The other thing you might look into, which has been shown in South Korean studies, are those brain imagings and brainwave tests and brain blood flow, so MRI scans. So in South Korea, they have found that the blood flow to the front part of the brain is reduced in people with video game addiction. So what they did was they put 20 professional esports players and 20 people who had gaming addiction, and then 20 people who didn't play games, and they put them all through an MRI machine. And they did find that the people who had esports as a profession, their brains work differently to someone who would be playing compulsively as an addiction. So people who are playing professionally are able to think about their game in a strategic way, whereas people who have the addiction probably do it in a more impulsive and compulsive way and have difficulty controlling their time. Now, the psychological aspects could be related to any anxiety, any family dynamic issues, their personality traits, so increased hostility or aggression, parental factors, such as supervision. So again, South Korean studies showed that single parent families, especially single mothers, struggled to manage their child's gaming use. I often find that when parents are disagreeing with each other, families that are separated and the kids spend some time in one parent's house and then their time is spent in another parent's house, or access is separated. Sometimes the rules are different in different households, and then kids will just want to spend time with the parent who's more permissive. And so the parenting permissiveness can also be a factor. Other social factors could be their ability to socialize with other people, their ability to say no. So a recent Spanish study showed that kids who would find it difficult to say no to a friend or had difficulty confronting a shopkeeper if they didn't give them enough change, some of those basic social skills were lacking in kids with video game addiction. I also find that kids who are bullied at school, who might have physical or medical issues, struggle with video game addiction, because when you're playing as an avatar, the social hierarchy and playing field is kind of leveled out. You know, you can't compare each other physically. You might compare each other in terms of your ability to play the game. But the cyber aspects, I guess, let's take, for example, that patient that I first saw all those years ago who had anorexia nervosa. My supervising psychiatrist had no idea what a video game was or what this World of Warcraft was all about. And back then, World of Warcraft was the sort of leader. Many gamers that you talk to, including myself, fear that game. They're worried about how good that game is designed and how immersive it is. We'll stay right away from it because we know that to get anywhere in that game, you need to sink a lot of time into the game. And so when I met this patient, they were actually a young adult female, and I was kind of curious in 2008 as to why they were playing this game. And sure enough, they were actually not feeding their avatar, not replenishing the hit points, and they would just spend their time healing other people in their guild or their team. And so they had more of a social motivation to play the game. Now, if you look back even further into their developmental history, this young person suffered a lot of trauma. And for them, the online world was the only safe place for them. And so you got to make all these connections, and you can't just say, right, you've got a gaming addiction, you have to stop right now. It's a dangerous thing. You have to sort of approach it in a personalized way and really understand the gaming motivations. I mean, one of the key questions that I ask with any young person that comes with a gaming disorder referral is I say, what's your favorite game? And what do you find so fun about it? Because by showing some interest in the game, you're showing interest in their world and engaging with them. And then by asking them what's so fun about the game, you realize what their motivations of play are.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kim. Before I ask a follow-up question, I just want to let everyone know that a poll tab or box will pop up on your window. If you could just complete those 5 questions, that would be fabulous. Kim, you know, the World Health Organization voted to include gaming disorder as part of the ICD-11, as we just mentioned, but the video game industry protested the classification, claiming that video games were being blamed or branded for a person's already underlying mental health issues. So really my question here is, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Do people who already struggle with mental health concerns play games excessively, or do games lead to increase in mental health concerns?
It's a great question. First of all, I think obviously the gaming industry want to protect their own, you know, golden goose, so to speak. And you can watch all the interviews online from the Senate inquiries, and it's quite amazing how, you know, how they have a strategy and terminology to sort of downplay the dangerous effects and potential harms. Now, in terms of which came first, the study that was published by the Singaporean team and Douglas Gentile back in 2013 did a longitudinal study. They studied like, I don't know, something like 3,000 students in Singaporean classrooms at different year levels. And they looked at anxiety and depression and their gaming time. And what they did notice is that when you gamed more, you increased your gaming time, your anxiety and depression got worse. And when you cut down your gaming time, it improved. And likewise, people who were anxious and depressed tended to escape more into the game. So when you hear interviews by Douglas Gentile, he'll say that it works both ways. And I think, you know, that's why those types of questions are so common, and why a biopsychosocial model can come in really handy, because you're trying to understand the timeline and the connections between what has happened in their lives. So, for example, I had a young person who honestly believed that esports was their only method of success in life, their only career path. And I was seeing them in the Women's and Children's Hospital, so I had access to their file from since they were born. And so I dug around in the file, and there was actually a report by an occupational therapist written when they were about 4 or 5 years old, who wrote that their handwriting was actually quite good, but their handwriting got tired after a while, after an hour. And this young person's self-esteem was very much rooted in this esports world. And they believed that they needed to spend more time to train to get better. And their parents had no idea that this was the case. And, you know, we ended up having another conversation with their parents about other options for success in life or other career paths. But I had to make the decision in the moment about this young person. And I said to them, look, when you play video games, do your hands get tired? And the young person said, yeah, it gets tired and they get fatigued. And I said to them, look, becoming an esports professional is already hard enough, but having this essentially muscle weakness or you know, brain to muscle weakness in his hands put him at a great disadvantage. And I said to him, your chances of becoming an esports professional are pretty much zero because of this, I guess, you know, you could call it a form of disability, but, you know, he could still enjoy games, but psychologically it meant that he could relieve himself from his own psychological pressure of needing to train to become an esports professional.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Kim. It really kind of covers the whole psychosocial element of gaming and gaming harm. And if we just shift to sort of the warning signs, we've talked about similarities, we've talked about some potential harms of gaming and gambling. Ryan, not too dissimilar to gambling, it can be rather difficult to know whether someone is struggling with gaming. What can professionals look out for to help them identify a developing gaming problem, but specifically a gambling concern?
believe we're going to share the polls now as well. So when I think about how do you recognize it, I mean, gaming and gambling, I guess, as behavioral addictions look pretty similar. You know, so some of the things you might see that would be similar would be most people are pretty secretive around their gambling. You don't really hear about the losses, you hear about the wins, but if you ask more questions, they want to kind of keep that down. In the same way, I think if people are gaming too much and they're noticing it, they'll start to hide that too. So people being secretive, the more you hide it, the bigger the problem, I guess, is really a good indicator. Emotions, the bigger the emotions, the bigger the problem. When I talk to my clients that gamble, you know, they're talking about watching a sports game and they're watching AFL and they're just losing it at the TV and they're throwing things and they're getting super mad and angry and not enjoying watching the game. They're just focused so much on the results. And in the same way with games, you know, you're talking about throwing controllers, you're talking about yelling, you're talking about, you know, they're playing a game, their parents come in, they're yelling at their parents and they're things like that. So those two things pop up as things to pay attention to. I guess also the time spent, not just gaming or gambling, but also on related activities. So with gaming, it might be around YouTube, around looking up how to solve certain things and how to get better, and watching streamers, which are, you know, people playing the game and streaming it online for people to watch. Or for gambling, it's like people like, let's say sports bets, they're looking up all the stats of all the games they've ever played, their favorite players, what their stats are on marks and kicks and completions and all this sort of stuff, because it helps them gamble better. Well, they think it does. Research tends to suggest not so much. So with gaming specifically, I guess what I hear about is difficulty in turning it off, or if they're called for dinner or whatever else, they're like, yeah, don't come. I guess you notice a lot more stress, anger, as I said, getting very emotional during games. They're dropping activities. So now they start not doing so much, and that just tends to be what they do. Tends to be all they talk about. You might also notice tiredness because they're not sleeping, because they're playing games or they're really hyped up. I remember I played Call of Duty, and I was playing it one night, and there's never, a bit like gambling, there's never a good time to stop. When you're winning gambling, why would you stop? Because you're making money. But when you're losing, well, my luck's got to turn soon. And so I'm always like, oh, just one more game. I'll play one more game. And then you win, you're like, oh, good, I'm winning. So I'll play another one. I'll play another one. And then when you lose, like, oh, well, hopefully I can get a good team. And so you don't want to finish on a loss. So you play again, but then I remember poking and looking out the window, and the sun was coming up, and I'm like, ooh, I didn't intend to do this. And I wasn't feeling tired. And then I decided to slip into bed next to my partner so that she wouldn't know I've been playing all night. So, you know, you're kind of hearing some of those things around time spent, you're hearing about emotions, you're hearing about being secretive. With gambling specifically, I guess you might hear they might be borrowing money, they're seemingly short, even just after payday or whatever else, because lots of kids are working. Maybe items go missing around the house. I've heard that with a number of my gambling clients. You know, again, talking about wins, but you don't seem to hear about losses. Lots of gamblers talk about the wins. Depression and stress. In a lot of the houses with clients that gamble, I'm hearing a lot of altercations in terms of just stressful environment or stressful interactions between them and their parents or them and their partners. So yeah, being angry and very emotional during games. Another thing that kind of pops up as well when we think about how to know, addictions, because addictions, the way we look at it is, or the way I look at it is, it's a way of coping with stress. It's a way of coping with life and its difficulties, its challenges. So there's often a lot of comorbidities. So you might find it paired with alcohol use. You might find it paired with, like Kim was saying before, anxiety and depression and things like that. Yeah, comorbidities are really common in addictions, which just tells you about the struggle and tells you that they're suffering.
Yeah, definitely. Kim, if I'm going just to hand over to you, you know, gaming harm can go undetected until it's causing serious harm and people are referring to someone like you as an expert in the field. I guess we were to really highlight some of those early, obvious, and not so obvious warning signs to our professionals attending today, what would you say? What can you highlight?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a broad question. Different people get referred for different reasons. Just thinking broadly, a young person could get referred for an ADHD assessment, for example. And we do know that there's a link between ADHD and video games, because video games are so fast moving, it captures your visual attention. And so you're able to focus and spend hours on video games. But when you stop playing video games, everything else seems really slow, including homework and chores and that sort of thing. Other referrals that I get are kids who are on the autism spectrum. And again, there's a link between autism and video gaming. From just an individual level, video games appeal to people on the autism spectrum because it's very predictable. Everything's programmed. You don't need to read facial expressions. And it has been shown, in some case studies, that kids who spend excessive screen time can have what we call autism-like symptoms. And so there was a case study from Japan where the researchers noticed that a kid who scored quite high on the autism scale said, look, why don't you ask your child, who I think was 5 or 6, to stop using screens altogether for a few months and come back and get retested. And sure enough, the child on the scale scored lower on autism. And so they coined that as mimicking autism features and an attachment problem. From a day-to-day side of things, kids falling asleep in class, skipping meals, falling behind academically. With any kind of disorder, you're looking at impairment and dysfunction. So, you'd think that for a young person, it would be pretty normal to have, some face-to-face time with the family or see friends face-to-face. And, a lot of these kids would have had a lot of close friends or were very active in the community. But I've seen a lot of referrals actually from Victoria who've had the extended lockdown. They've lost their sense of community. They've lost their usual activities, the basketball, the netballs, the horse riding, all those community aspects. And then they replace that with screen time and games. And next thing you know, the kids have trouble stopping and the time just gets more and more and more. So that with, say, gambling or addictions, that you need the increased amount of time or increased something or amount to get the same effect, or playing the same amount doesn't give you the same amount of joy or fun. And just spending a lot of time thinking about it, it becomes, your number one priority, spending a lot of time thinking about it and craving it when you're not able to play. So one of the questions that I used to ask that was, that kind of worked was, do you have any days off during the week where you don't play games? Or when was the last time where you had a stretch of time where you didn't play games, like a school camp? But nowadays, a lot of kids play games every day. And for some kids, they just tell me outright, I don't need to go to school camp. It's not compulsory. And so times have changed over the years. And when I was in Singapore, so I spent 6 months in Singapore looking at the video gaming addiction clinics over there, and I helped them write a commentary in the Australian New Zealand Journal of Psychiatry. And we found out that the typical young person that presented to that addiction clinic for games spent at least 45 hours per week playing video games. And 45 hours per week is like a full-time job and not getting paid for that. And if you look at, say, Fortnite, Fortnite has this mechanism called a battle pass, which is essentially paying money for a contract, where if you complete a certain number of tasks in a 10-week period, you could earn back that money you spent plus more. So it entices you to get more virtual rewards. And when you click yes, it tells you this is going to cost you 15 Australian dollars, but in order to win back up to, you know, 200 Australian dollars worth of prizes, you're going to have to sink 100 hours into this game on average. Some less, some more.
Yeah.
But what they're trying to say is that the kids are working for $2 an hour. And so for some of the more mature kids, I kind of try and paint that picture about what's fair, and, you know, if you were working a job, how much money would you be happy with? These kids are very happy and satisfied to work for peanuts.
Okay, great. I just want to remind everyone, we've had one question come through, and thank you for the person who asked that feel free to ask any questions. There's no right or wrong questions. We want to hear from you, and we want to provide the information that's most relevant to you. So allow the questions to flood through, and we have ample time to get to those in a minute. So to move into a more hopeful kind of segment now, Ryan, from what I know, you work quite holistically with your clients, and you tend to emphasize early intervention and prevention. What preventative measures could be taken to reduce the harmful impacts of gaming, and specifically gambling, on young people?
Sure. Before I jump into that, though, I'll just reinforce, I guess, what I heard Kim saying before. I was doing some work with the school recently, and they were talking a bit about they noticed due to COVID, a number of kids had disengaged further from school, or had disengaged from school because I guess when they were home, they could spend as much time as they wanted to playing games, and that was a lot more fun and a lot less intimidating than going to school and having to deal with all of that. So that, yeah, that's been an effect I'm hearing out as well. But yeah, in terms of how to support, I guess one of the things I'm thinking about is a bit of a public health message in terms of, you know, when I think about schools, we talk about sexual health, we talk about, you know, alcohol can be problematic. We can talk about, you know, don't do drugs, kids, etc. But I don't really hear us talking about the risks around gaming or gambling. And we talk about maybe cyberbullying, but I don't think we talk about how to game more safely. So I think that's really important. So one of the things we've developed has been early intervention and prevention kind of program called Level Up, which is working with kids in schools around developing resilience and talking about gaming and some of those risks. I think also when we think about schools, are they inadvertently promoting it? I mean, like I remember when I was at school, we had the Melbourne Cup and everyone stops to watch the horse run in a circle. And you know, there's sweeps, and teachers might even give out little things saying, this is your horse, and if you win a little prize. And in that same way, we're socializing people into going, hey, you should do this is fun, it's great. So that might be a thing to think about. I think also, when you're noticing a problem, whatever it is, it's good to sit with the kid and explore with them, a bit like Kim was saying, and asking a bit about what they do for fun. Because when you ask people what they do for fun is where you're going to uncover the things that might be a problem or might not. You don't have to jump down as if you hear they play a PlayStation game or something, you go, oh my God, I'm terrified. But that might be a doorway into finding out about how much you're playing it, how often, how frequently, for how long. And then you might hear it being a problem. And then, you know, I think pairing up alongside the child to address whatever it is that they're suffering with and what they're coping with is the important bit. But if you feel a bit overwhelmed, you can refer to other professionals, whether it's psychologists, whether it's, you know, Kim, whether it's ourselves or somewhere else with the support. When I think for advice for individuals or parents or to give to individuals, I'm thinking, where possible, avoid games with in-app purchases, just because it just removes the temptation. Those games are designed to push you to spend money. Like even I think about FIFA Ultimate Team as an example. So that's in FIFA, it's a G-rated game. So I guess one of the things that's important to me is that the games they're playing that can have these consequences aren't limited to R. Gambling in games isn't necessarily an R-rated game, and games with loot boxes aren't necessarily, or pay-to-win mechanics and things like that, and skins, things like that, aren't necessarily M. Because you know, Crash Team Racing, a game my kid plays, is G, but you've got to pay in coins to get new carts, to get new characters, to get new skins for the characters, to get colors for the carts, and like a new character is like 1,500 coins, and you win 25 coins per race. Or you can spend like $10 and get like I don't know, 1,500 coins. So now you can spend $10 and get the skin. And that's there by design. It's not there by chance. It's not there by accident. They're just trying to milk you. So avoiding those games is good where possible. So you just avoid that pressure because they always have the exciting stuff to pay for. Perhaps play single player story focused games because you can save, you can exit much easier. Whereas a multiplayer online game, you might be in the middle of something and you can't pause, you can't do anything. Also, they have an endpoint. A lot of games that people get addicted to, and I'm not saying exclusively, but the more addictive side of things tends to be things where when you get to the end, it doesn't end. There's still always more and more and more stuff to do. You know, when I think of like World of Warcraft, which Kim talked about earlier, like they're always releasing new content, and then even if they're not releasing new content, they're changing up content. So you've got to relearn and redo stuff, or they make the top set of armor not so good anymore because there's this new set of armor that's better. You've got to grind and work hard to get that. Put time limits on games prior to playing. When I was talking about how your brain works before, and the clever planning part, which is really stress sensitive, if you're thinking about how long you want to play beforehand, you might come up with a good decision. Whereas when you're actually in it, so when you're either gambling or whether you're gaming, when you're in it, you're going to make bad choices. So lots of people who talk about gambling, for example, talk about, you know, oh, I was going to $50, but then they come back and so they talk to the venue staff and say, oh, look, just another $200. This is my last $200. It's fine, it's fine. But then they come back a third time and a fourth time. You know, with me, when I was playing Call of Duty, you know, just another game, just one more game, or just one more loot box, or just one more. It's always just one more, just a little bit, just a little bit. You know, when I think about Pokemon Go as an example, I was on a forum and I was seeing someone talk about this because they release the bosses more recently, every week it changes. And so this boss has been out for less than a week, and this person's like, man, I've already spent $50 on raid passes and I still haven't got the shiny one. Because what they do with the bosses is you get bosses, but there's also a chance you might get one that's slightly different colored, usually, maybe slightly vague. And when I think about that, you know, he's done this raid over 50 times and still hasn't got a shiny yet, and he still wants to get more, still wants to get more, still wants to get more. So yeah, I think trying to avoid things in that purchase is good. Managing stress is really important because, you know, usually the gaming and gambling is a response to getting overwhelmed. So if you're managing to manage your stress, feel on top of things, it's not going to take over so strongly, most likely. A bit about developing passions. So I think with everything in life, it's balance. I mean, lots of people gamble and don't get addicted. Lots of people play games and don't get addicted. And I think usually when you've got a number of things you can do to cope with stress, a number of things in your life that you really enjoy, that are fun, I think that's really, really useful and a really good preventative. One thing I kind of suggest, but I think is a bit of a problem at times, is get your important stuff done first. So, you know, when I think about with kids, you know, if you get your empty dishwasher, do your homework, and then play games, that strategy to get the stuff that matters done. The problem I find is it puts a polarity between chores or responsibilities and fun. And then whenever you've got your responsibilities out of the way, you just turn towards that gaming or that whatever it is, that one thing that maybe that you do for fun. Whereas I think often a lot of really important things, when you think about what life's about, it often sits in that middle point You know, like I can think of a kid who wants to be a professional basketballer, and he was doing really well, but because of gaming, he wasn't practicing. He had to kind of get pushed into going to his trainings. He wasn't that keen to go to his games. So that kind of often sits in that space of it's kind of responsibility, but we kind of do it because we enjoy it, and for other reasons. You know, hanging out with family, spending time with kids. Is it always fun? Not really. Is it a responsibility? Kind of. It kind of sits in that middle point. I think often that's where the real important bits in life sit, and so the polarity kind of squeezes that out. For parents, I think it's really important to be proactive. Don't wait for there to be a problem. I think we should be having conversations with kids around, you know, safety around gaming and gambling. And when I think about parents, when kids are getting older, we don't have quite as much control as, I suppose, as you get older. When they're 2-year-old, you can pick them up, you can put them in their room if that's what you're going to do, or you can do all sorts of things. When they're older, they've got jobs, they've got cars, they can kind of do what they want. So what I'm often focused on is around the relationship, and how do you develop a relationship, and how does that matter, and then using that relationship as a bit of leverage. Well, I guess as the lever to influence, and setting boundaries with the kid. So planning, but then you're the one to enforce it, because kids, when they're in that space, are going to have difficulty saying no. So if you're there in the background saying, look, it needs to be off by this point, or this is going to happen, then you're going to be a lot more effective. And I guess also the other thing I think about is some other pathways, like you know, Kim's CGI clinic. There's another place I know called EMP Pathways, which is looking at connecting kids with employment pathways through their skills they learn in gaming, and also other passions like music and things like that. We also have a program called Stepping Up to Gaming, which is around dealing with problematic gaming with parents and the child. And there's a couple other people like that, and also our one-to-one counselling we do here.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that very broad and very thorough description of what people can do, as in individually, but also advice they can provide. Kim, if we're to focus specifically on gaming and professionals such as mental health professionals and teachers, what do you think professionals working with young people can do better or more of to help this cohort of gamers?
The first thing they can do is just acknowledge that this can potentially be a problem and could have a link to anything else that they're presenting with, and not to ignore it. And if you have no idea what it's about, like, I just Google what the game that they're playing is, look up the classification and get the basic idea. Usually Common Sense Media gives me some good ideas around what the game entails and what some of the problems are. If I'm really wanting to be a detective, I'll just actually log into the Game Quitters forum, which is a free forum for gaming addicts. I've used it for myself twice to detox. So if you really want to find me and my journey through detoxing myself over 90 days, you can probably find it somewhere on the internet. But I'll just put it out there to people and say, anyone played this particular game? Any pitfalls from your experience being addicted to that game? And they'll be quite open about it. The other, I guess, aspect or tips that I would have for any clinical professionals would be, if you physically get a referral and it says this child has been gaming too much and the parents are complaining about it, see the parents first alone without the kid. Because whenever I've seen the family together at the start, all hell's break loose. Like the child, the young person feels ashamed. The parents are just like nagging them in the session, berating them in front of you, and then you lose all engagement with the young person. And this kind of links back to Corinna's question about involving the caregivers in the therapeutic process. So I'll see either the young person first or the parents first, and then I'll see them together, because most likely the parents at some stage have lost their sense of authority in terms of managing the games, and the child has become the authority in the family and they rule the roost. And as part of the session, a lot of the time, they're looking at the professional as a third party who can say yes or no, that their child has this problem, and that you give the parents back the power and give them some, basic techniques about how to manage it, how to better manage it. And then if the child is motivated and has some insight into getting a detox, how can the parents help them with that? And really, a lot of it is about selling the idea of a detox, or even just having a break from gaming. Because the University of Adelaide and Flinders University, they have a study called the 84-hour abstinence protocol, which means Friday midday to Monday midday, the gamer gave away their passwords to the researchers, so they didn't have access to their game for a total of 84 hours over the weekend. And the reason why the researchers chose the weekend is because that's when you're most likely going to binge on long stretches of gaming marathons. And so if you gave your brain that 84-hour break from games, the researchers on follow-up found out that at 1 week and at 4 weeks follow-up, their negative cognitions associated with the games reduce, and then their overall gaming time reduced also. Now, in terms of my own experience going through gaming detoxes, so the first game I detoxed was from Pokemon Go. I was heavily involved in that. I played it for over a year, and I said to myself, it's just taking up too much time. And I failed within the first week. It was so hard to quit because of the social aspect. So I was part of a guild, a team. And when the new events came up a week later, my teammates were like, Kim, you gotta come back, you gotta come back. This is happening. And they'll tell me. And essentially, the game designers gave me an offer that I seriously couldn't refuse, and I relapsed within a week. But then I tried again, and then I successfully detoxed after 90 days. And only recently, after a couple of years, did I, play again with my cousin who plays with his children. And I actually got that shiny you mentioned, Ryan.
Nice.
We went. So I think what happened was the game designers must have picked up that I hadn't touched the game for years, and they knew that I was playing with other people. And I suspect that the algorithm said we should give this guy the shiny out of the group because this could potentially bring him back. But I just didn't get that buzz that everyone else got from it. But that's how sneaky the game designers can be. And so I often talk about how the hit song by the Eagles, Hotel California, they sung the song, they say, we're all just prisoners here of our own device. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. And so these video games, it's like you can log out anytime you like, but the game designers design it so that they don't want you to leave, and it's really hard to leave.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And thank you for bringing your personal perspective into it, Dr. Kim. I guess people often see professionals as the know-all that do no wrong, and the fact that you have that personal experience makes it a lot easier to work with these young people.
But the thing, just before you mention that, the funny thing is I used to always sort of think, oh, should I, it is kind of like a boundary thing, right? But I'm actually finding that talking about my own experience actually helps me to engage. And then the parents are more likely to refer them back to me because they're like, no one else actually understands what they're going through. And so more lately, I've been using that as a way to engage the young person.
And just on that point, Dr. Kim, I would love to hear your opinion. Young people are subjected to a lot of things being done to them or not being done with them at all. What would be the benefits of collaborating with our young people, working with them closely? Yes, there is that element of the parents to set boundaries, but what would be some of those benefits of working with our young people around their gaming or gambling?
It's a really interesting question. I guess, spending one-on-one time with them, doing an activity that doesn't involve gaming. But then again, why not ask them if you can join in with the game and get them to teach you about the game that they love so much? and get an idea of what really makes them want to play. But then also notice anything else, any other gaps that could be lacking in their real world, and trying to support them in that way. And I guess trying to be non-judgmental and approach it in a way that, you know, the game is something that's really important to them, but trying to offer them alternatives without saying that gaming's, you know, the worst thing in the world, which in some instances it can get significantly be a detriment to their lives. But yeah, I find that if you try and come in a non-judgmental way, you're going to get more success for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I just want to go to the question we have. So Dr. Kim already answered one of the questions. The remaining question we have is, I guess I'll put this forward to you, Dr. Kim, because it is specifically around gaming.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the positive aspects of gaming for teens and young people, and how would we know if it has become a problem?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, just the other day, I was helping out my 6-year-old nephew with his math homework. And this math homework was done online in a game, and it really engaged him. And he would get rewarded with marbles. Now, the funny thing about this platform was they had this game that was separate to the math problem, where it was a pachinko marble game, which is considered, you know, in Japan, a form of gambling, but a more of a game. And I was quite worried by that, actually. So games are really good. Like, games in their pure form are a form of play. And we play because we want to experiment with parts of our lives that, you know, parts of our personality that we might not get to exercise in day-to-day lives without the risk of, you know, getting to conflict with people and having them have a grudge on you, because it's just a game, you know, you move on scenario. But then again, Monopoly has broken many relationships, I'm sure. But in terms of the actual benefits, there have been studies where psychiatrists have used the game Second Life to build a virtual therapy room, and they've used it to teach medical students about how to speak to patients. And so the students and the junior doctors would all get their own avatar, and they built a one-way screen, and the supervisor would sit behind the virtual one-way screen, and they tried to teach them about therapy and family therapy, and that showed positive benefit in terms of engagement. The other study that is often quoted is Tetris, reducing PTSD symptoms. So, and again, in the UK, they studied people who came through the emergency department after a car crash, and they found out that if you gave them a Nintendo DS with Tetris on it, their PTSD symptoms reduce on follow-up. And so it's a good way to escape. And, you know, when I had an incident myself where I was in a traumatic event at hospital, I remembered this, and I ended up playing online Monopoly that night as a way to distract myself. And I don't know whether that did help or not, but eventually I did, you know, seek support from my friends. I went out and did swimming again. But for some people, maybe they would have kept on playing online games from that incident. The other study that is often quoted around the world actually came from Adelaide. So many years ago, the Women's and Children's Hospital, they had a burns unit where they got UniSA to build them a virtual reality machine, and they gave kids who were receiving treatment for their burns dressings, so very painful nursing dressing every day. They found out that the kids who put on a virtual reality headset required less morphine. And so from that study, you can now in New York give birth to your child with a virtual reality headset and not need an epidural. And so they've got all these military applications So, the virtual world is very powerful. It's just how we use that power for good or bad. And are we aware of the power?
Definitely. I think that's a very important statement to make. It's how we use the virtual world that can make it safe or unsafe for people all ages. I guess, Kim, just to wrap up, is there any final comments or statements that you want to make?
Well, it's great that you're all tuning in. Maybe log off and go outside, get some sunlight.
Fantastic. Ryan, are there any final comments that you'd like to make to our attendees today?
Sure. Look, I could talk for a really long time, and I'm going to try and keep it short. As Kim talks, I always keep thinking about more and more stuff. I guess when I think about talking to kids, one of the things, whether it's gaming or gambling, I'm thinking, you want to avoid stigma and shame. And look at the behavior as a problem, not the person as a problem. Often we get caught up with, ideas around moral failures or they're being bad. Look around the behavior and focus purely on the behavior. And when I think about people that might not feel resourced in this area, I mean, given it's often a symptom, I'm really interested in paying attention to what else is going on and how can they help around that, because often they're really well resourced around, often the helping professionals usually will really well resourced around dealing with anxiety or depression or whatever else. It starts young. I mean, I think about some games that have in-app purchases and push you in that way, things like Roblox and things like that. So we don't need to I think we're often thinking about late adolescents, but it's also 8-year-olds. So pay attention to that as well. We have another video of me and Kim having a chat about this. It's super exciting, or at least to me it is. So look, we'll send you a link to that later on, but do watch it. It's about another 30 minutes. You can watch it in your own time, in your leisure. But I guess to summarize, when I think about gaming and gambling, what's the difference? When you think about fantasy sports, where people pick different players from different teams and then they kind of make their own team of that. When you think about loot boxes, when you think about all this sort of stuff, the difference, or what's the difference between pokies or pokies where you don't spend money but might link you towards it? The only difference is that you can't win $15,000, $20,000. That seems to be the only difference. The effects, the outcomes, the consequences are the same. It looks the same in terms of behavior. It looks the same in terms of consequences. Behavioral addictions are all pretty similar. So yeah, what's the difference? The only difference I can think of is money-ish.
Okay, that's a fantastic summary. Thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you so much, Dr. Kim. I guess just to summarize, there are many crossovers that both Dr. Kim and Ryan have highlighted about gaming and gambling. They both occur on various platforms that are easily accessible to our young people. And some of the most common warning signs or overlap between both gaming and gambling can be changes in money, sleep patterns, mood, job, school, and social activities. It's definitely not limited to only those warning signs, so please do your own research. Gaming and gambling harm is everyone's business, and as educators and health professionals, each and every one of us has a crucial role to play in educating and supporting our young people to have a healthy and happy life. So today, I would like to invite each and every one of you to think about just one thing that you can take away from today's webinar that you can do differently or do more of to help improve the life of the young people that you work with. Remember that CGI Clinic, Dr. Huu Kim and Relationships Australia, South Australia Gaming and Gambling Help Service is here to support you. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you all for your contributions, your questions, and for your presence, and a huge and special thank you to our wonderful Dr. Kim Lee for your attendance and contribution today.